How you doing, Amber? Good morning to everybody.
I'm good. How
Um,
are you?
I am fantastic, fantastic. Um, let me. This morning's webinar is going to be on Leah. I'll put the slideshow up there.
Let me bring it up.
Just one moment. I saw. Is it up there?
I'll pull it up.
If not, I can share my screen.
I gotta hit share screen. All right. Can you see it?
Yes. Yes, I can. Scroll to the agenda. Okay, great. Okay. The webinar today is going to be on DEI messaging for executives and reducing the enterprise risk and doing business better. The way we're going to do that is going through the agenda. We're going to talk about the corporate challenge, telling the right story, preparing for A/B scenarios, the multiplication strategy, and then open the floor for some discussions and for some reflections and questions. The corporate challenge. Who is sitting at your table? A clear vision for DEI, the intentionality of language, and from the business case to a sustainable case. Who sits at your table has everything to do with what you see, what you hear, and ultimately the decisions that are made. This can sound like a good thing, and it should be, unless you're getting limited or incorrect information. As a leader, it is imperative that you set the tone, direction, and example for every person in the organization. A major part of this awesome responsibility for a leader is an uncompromising dedication to the truth. Now, I say that because it's very easy to fall into a mindset of where you sit is all that you see. Sometimes by being high in the rungs of an organization, a leader, and I say we, can get disconnected from the very information we need to make better decisions, informed decisions that positively impact the bottom line without sacrificing people. What this means is understanding that all of the information that you hear is not going to be positive, and that's okay. This is the information that has to be embraced as an improvement opportunity or opportunities. It is not information that should be discounted or otherwise discouraged through a look, through sometimes a non-response or the other nonverbal cues that a leader can do to essentially shut down dissent. If we are going to operate from what I call a growth mentality or an abundance mentality, a leader has to be open to hearing whatever's on the mind of the people who are working for her, him, or them. This is also how as a leader, we can create that space. We hear it thrown around quite easily and quite frequently. We call it psychological safety. It is a good thing, but as easy as it is to say, it may not be as easy to execute because it is a awesome undertaking. It is very pervasive and it escapes no part of the organization. In this space, I'm going to call that space, the psychological space, that metaphorical table, becomes a place where challenge is welcome, where compassion and empathy is apparent. As stated by Timothy Clark in his book, 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, and a certification to support it, if you really, really want to get into psychological safety and really appreciate the value of it, before any of the things that we are talking about can happen, Timothy Clark says there must be cover before candor. Again, sounds simple on the surface, but what it says very succinctly is this: for the honesty and the openness that we are saying is necessary for a successful business, the people who want to say these things must feel like they're in a place where they will be supported, where there will not be ridiculed, where there will not be repercussions for them giving you the very thing that you need to keep your company salient, to make it successful. In this way, you can actually hear and know what's going on at every level of the organization and create an organization that is truly inclusive. Let's talk about establishing this clear vision. A clear vision for DEI understands that every person in the organization is valuable, because diversity is all about valuing people. DEI is about positively impacting the bottom line through the appreciation of people, not on the backs of people. It's very easy for a really good idea, and I see DEI as a really, really good idea, but it's very easy for a good idea with the focus on the bottom line to become what is already there, part of the status quo. And that is seeing people as a factor of production. We don't want to get into that. We don't want to do that because it's not necessary. A mindset of being all about the Benjamins, all about the money, ultimately ends in someone being disadvantaged and a business sometimes going the wrong way. Let's be clear and let's be honest. Business operates to make money. It's not a bad thing. It becomes something that is unwanted when we lose focus and abuse the very element that is the foundation of success for that business, and that is people. DEI refocuses the lens of success on people through the appreciation of people, and positively, and I said and positively, impacts the bottom line through that appreciation. Which brings us to the intentionality of language. We talk about nonverbal cues, and we understand the value of that. We understand sometimes the most powerful message that can be sent by a leader is not saying anything, but just looking a certain way. Paying attention to the language that we use, verbal and nonverbal, and the language used by others in their response, sometimes called social perceptiveness, as we read people to see if they're understanding what we're saying and appreciating what we're saying, means everything. Saul Alansky, I like to quote him, once said, "He who controls the language controls the masses." When we speak, we must be acutely aware of what we say, being intentional, how it is understood by asking questions once we say whatever it is or state whatever it is that we want to be understood, and then being vigilant on our follow through. We promote DEI as a strategic imperative. We know it is good for business because it's been here for decades. It just hasn't been talked about on the level and with the clarity and with the openness that we talk about it in the DEI space. So with that, we have to be very careful of the subtle changes that are being suggested to the DEI message. I had to learn a brilliant woman was telling me, I believe that we can stop talking about DEI now. We can just talk about all people. And as nice as that sound, and as nice as that could be, this is a person who means well, but thinks we're further along in the success than we are. We're not there yet. We're getting there. We're making gains, but it's nowhere near the level that people think because the message is not clear. The language is not clear. When we start taking things like DEI and rearranging the letters or deleting the diversity component because we think all people should be valued and included without the emphasis and without the strength necessary to truly appreciate people, we might wake up one day and find out what we were pushing for has gone. Because the real change, sometimes the pernicious changes that happens to good ideas, doesn't happen all at once. It happens subtly. So we have to pay attention. We have to be vigilant. We have to follow through. That way we can ensure that the very thing that we cherish is not taken away from us and while we are asleep at the wheel. Which brings us to the business case. From the business case to a sustainable mission case. The business case is absolutely essential. You may hear people say, we don't really need a business case. We can just have business from the perspective of, especially DEI, just doing the right thing. There is a place to do the right thing. The affirmative action initiatives, the civil rights movement was about ensuring that we did the right thing. We stand on that and we appreciate the efforts for the civil rights movements and all of the legislation that was produced in that process because it is still necessary. But the business case is where we start to make our greater gains. The business case is so strong as to hear this piece. If there is no business case, the clock is ticking on what you do. The position that you have is about to be short-lived. Because for every other entity in a company, in a business, in an institution, the business case has been lodged and been won and proven to be needed. The same thing has to happen for DEI. Without the business case, there is no you. But again, don't forget that what we lean on, what we depend most upon is the appreciation of people. What has to be remembered is that we don't sacrifice valuing people to prove or sustain a business case. We're about people. The beautiful thing is that when this is done right and the appreciation of a solid business plan, the zero-sum mentality is not a part of the conversation because we're operating from an and perspective. We're saying we can have the appreciation and valuing of people and impact the bottom line positively because both can be sustained through good thinking and a solid DEI initiative. The sustainability piece, in other words, a sustainable mission case, it's all about designing a system that is successful now and equally successful in the future. When what we are proposing is embraced and executed with the intention and inclusion of both the business case and consequently a successful mission case, the businesses that are functioning now successfully will be sustainable in the future and will be considerate of, respectful of, and inclusive of every person who is capable of providing the service to that business or industry. Change the slide, please.
And I want to just jump in, Dr. Lee, and good morning, everyone. I just want to jump in here when we're looking at the business case and companies and organizations are thinking about what the business case is for DEI. Don't forget, we had significant studies over the last couple of weeks and months and years that have demonstrated the cost of sexism and racism. So while nations are struggling to find out how to contain the cost of inflation and how to ensure that companies are sustainable, the thing is, there was a Citigroup study that showed that there was a cost of $16 trillion in the US alone for racism. So imagine what solving the racism problem would do in the terms of a $16 trillion cash infusion. Now, the World Bank also found a similar result if we said, okay, let's eliminate sexism. Globally, we would have a $160 trillion cash infusion if we eliminated sexism. That's just racism and sexism alone. That doesn't include all the other isms and phobias and everything else. So just think about where we could not only save money, but also generate additional revenue and income just by eliminating some of the things that we have traditionally allowed ourselves to be held captive with. I think one of the other issues that we are facing here is the fact that organizations are nervous, and they're worried about lawsuits. They're worried about individuals who are um, going to act in a backlash capacity. It's a lot of things that are going on that makes this DEI journey rather tenuous right now. For those of you who are listening right now, I want you to put in the chat some of the things that you think are challenging when it comes to DEI messaging in organizations. Just share a few ideas regarding DEI messaging and what you think is a challenge for organizations today. What do you think is a challenge? What else? Janine said executive buy-in. Kelly said leaders having a fear of saying the wrong thing. Cheryl said using the correct language and not offending. Samuel said the commitment and resources made available to middle management. Gina said leaders listening to all the noise. Denise said leadership not knowing how to articulate the message in order to properly support. Angela said, oh, this is going too fast. That's what we want.
You open up the gates.
Yes, that's what we want.
But this speaks clearly to the challenges of leadership and what is not being heard and what is not being said. And these are the very things that needs to be heard and needs to be said so we can make some real substantive changes.
Right. Cheryl said you asked for it.
Long-term commitment.
Amber, Shantae, or Karen, can you help read some of the comments in here?
LeVar shared some people in their mind already have a negative perception of the acronym DEI as it has been recently highly politicized. So when it comes up, there's a negative attitude. Janine shared leaders incorrectly assume they have to hire a diverse person instead of a qualified person, not realizing that they can have both. Cleonte shared from the performative DEI. And I'm gonna go up some a little bit more. Pamela shared getting hired into DEI and B, leader role, messaging to hire. Greg shared lack of long-term commitment. That's all of them.
Leah, you're on mute.
Okay. So as you all can see, there are a lot of challenges related to DEI messaging. And what we want to do is develop solutions, is offer you solutions to this huge challenge. Now, one of the big things that we talked about is this whole fear of lawsuits and fear. Like quite a few of you have noted fear, like Val Boston said, there's a real fear, right? There are a lot of people who noted that this fear is something that is real. And I want to highlight some of the challenges that we have around this. One of the big things is that our collective antagonists, those critics, they can smell the fear, just like they can smell blood in the water like sharks. They can smell that fear. Yeah, Cheryl said real fear for convincing leadership and risk averse in a risk averse environment.
Absolutely.
They can smell those critics can smell the fear, and it is so pervasive that they don't have to come after everybody. They just pick one person, right? And that fear immobilizes. It's causing folks to say, you know what, let's tamper down. Even Disney's CEO said, hey, I'm going to tamper down my culture war, right? I'm going to tamper down my role in this culture war. So think about this. When we're looking at this fear, the fear of getting sued, you have law firms getting sued, all these lawsuits flying in every which direction. You have the military academy being sued. You have people being sued everywhere. One of the things that we want to do is make it so that we are aware of these lawsuits, right? There's a lawsuit, I don't know if you all have heard, there's a lawsuit in Texas regarding supplier diversity. There was a couple, husband and wife, that owns a business, and they got a $1.3 million contract from the city of Houston. And part of the requirement is that they have to give 11% of their contract to a subcontractor that is a minority or woman-owned business enterprise. And now that they have the money, they're like, why do we have to give our portion of the money away, right? Why do we have to do this? And they're bringing a lawsuit. So if I were the legal counsel in Houston, here's how I would defend this. I would look at the historical relevance of this matter. And I did a little research on this. Business ownership for people of color, Black folks in Houston in particular, is not documented until like the 1900s, like 1920. Now, think about this. We're talking about the same state that is the reason why all of us are celebrating Juneteenth. Because they didn't end slavery until 2 years later. So when we're looking at Black business ownership in Houston, one of the things that we want to acknowledge is that some of the people of color have been late to the party. Not only were they late to the party, but they were basically giving their labor away for free without having received any benefits from it. Yeah. Not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but for years. Years. Okay. So to ask for a little piece of the pie, 11% is not a whole lot of money, considering the fact that the government is the reason why these individuals were not able to own businesses. They were not able to secure trademarks and own trademarks. They were not able to participate in contracting or other areas, right? So let's talk about the history. And this is the part that makes people uncomfortable because people don't want to acknowledge the truth, the history. So yesterday, Dr. Lee, I had a similar conversation with some of the people in my CDE prep course, and they talked about a common problem that many of you face, and that is the data does not support the data that's being shared is not supporting the reality. right? So what's happening with the data is that you all are producing these fabulous reports. This is wonderful, right? You're producing fabulous reports. And the senior leadership is saying, well, wait, we don't want to share all this, and we don't want to make all this public. We only want to share the pretty stuff, the good stuff, right? This is the equivalent of what I'll call making history, rewriting history, making history say what you want it to say. But it's important for us to not sugarcoat history, to not sugarcoat the reality of what it is. And we toiled about this, our leadership team, Dr. Lee, our CEO, and myself, we talked about it, and we kind of went through all the details. Like, do CEOs, do executives really want to tell the truth about their diversity numbers? Because some of them could be, fired. Some of them could get into trouble when they realize, hey, there's a big problem. And we really tossed and turned about whether or not leaders should tell the truth. And at the end of the day, our conscience told us that they should. Our conscience. We can't get away with this. We can't say, you know what, we're not going to tell the truth. And it was likened to our CEO reminded me of a story that I often tell about how healthcare organizations, sometimes hospitals, will say, we are an A+ service provider. We provide A+ healthcare to everybody, right? But that's not true, because sometimes the data shows that they're not as successful with people of different religions. They're not as successful with people who speak different languages. They're not as successful with people who have different health habits. They're not as successful with Black women. They're not as successful with this group and with LGBTQ and trans individuals. There's a whole bunch of folks that they are removing the data from that would actually pull down the score. So think about it like this. They're going and showing that they have an A+ rating when really, when you average in the collective data, it's not A. It's probably closer to a D or an F. And as a result, you see disparate healthcare outcomes. For instance, women of color who were dying disproportionately during childbirth. Here's the thing, let them go somewhere else. Tell the truth. If you're not committed to fixing it, don't let them come to your facility and die. Don't do that to a newborn child. Don't let them come to your facility and die because you want to hide the data. Let them go somewhere else where they will get better care. You have to be committed to fixing it. If it's wrong, don't sugarcoat it and act like nothing is wrong, nothing to see here. Fix it, or let them go somewhere else. Don't put up numbers and say that you're an A+ facility knowing that women are dying disproportionately during childbirth, especially during a time when some women in some states cannot get abortions. Let them go somewhere else. It's better for you to be truthful than for you to have blood on your hands. I know that's a strong message, but it's the truth. It's a strong message. Derwin, our CEO, also reminded me about a commercial a couple of years ago where it was a Domino's pizza commercial, and the CEO of Domino's Pizza said, you know what? We want you all to send pictures of your pizzas, and we want to see your response when you send us these pictures of pizzas. And one person sent a picture of a pizza with the cheese all mashed on the top. And this CEO was on TV on this commercial showing this is how this individual received this pizza. But you know what? We're going to fix it. He didn't lose business because he said, we're going to fix it. It was actually something that instilled confidence in more people when they knew that the CEO was committed to fixing it. And one of the things that we have to make it so is keep in mind, if we are glossing over the information and pretending like the numbers are rosier than what they really are, there is no commitment to fixing it. Let's be honest. It's just a commitment to hiding what the numbers really show. And no one is working on doing what is right to improve the business. Somebody has to say, we need to get better. We need to do better. Let's be transparent about it. Let's not make people think that we have made more progress than what we have, because that's what's happening. That's why all these lawsuits are coming about, because people are thinking we've made more progress than what we have. Why does the government need to continue to help these people? Because folks have these rosy numbers and these pictures and images showing that we are making more progress than what we really have. And we haven't. We haven't made that progress. Let's be transparent about the problems. Let's start telling the truth, and let's make a commitment to fix it. Dr. Lee, you have anything to add to that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, every time you start rolling, it gets me fired up. I'm trying to stay calm over here. Here's the deal. Anybody who's known me, especially in the facilitation course, know that there's always books to support it. There was a good book when Leah was talking about the atrocities in the medical world called Under the Skin by the lady's last name is Vela Rosa. Excellent book to support what Leah was saying with facts, with numbers. She's a journalist and a past physician. So these things that Leah is talking about is not something that's being said for hyperbole or just say to infuse you with passion. It's truth. These are the very things that we're talking about that is necessary to make real lasting change and decisions that are going to be good for business and industry over time. It is important that the whole truth be told in the conversation, because what we realize is a half truth is a potential lie. And we don't have to be afraid. Many of you have heard me say that fear is an acronym for fantasy experience is real. It's not real. The very thing that you fear is the very thing that you should walk to make the changes that you need to for substantial differences being made for every person. We focus on the leadership, CEOs, for a reason. These are people who are or were perceived as some of the most trusted people, and I'm going to use the United States, in America. These are people who are responsible for hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives, whose decisions was the determining factor of whether or not a person would have a house or retain a house, buy a house, have children, and everything else that goes with it. And there is no reason for the CEOs that we have this high opinion of to deviate now, to change our opinion of them. Tell the truth. The advantages are obvious, are painfully obvious. But when you have a mentality that if I say something, quote unquote, wrong, that there is no forgiveness. But here's the way we work as people. If you say something in honest and is trying to do something good and you're wrong, here's the tough part. I was wrong on that one. Whoa. However, what we're doing to correct it is A, B, C, and D. The analogy of the pizza. There was, I remember that commercial, as a matter of fact, Leah. There was a significant spike in business because of that. Because who does not want to know that, yes, you are human. And oh, by the way, when you find a mistake, you correct the mistake. You don't say, if I ignore it, it'll go away. In the world of DEI, we call that silently condoning wrong behavior. And who wants to be in an organization or be affiliated with any company who silently condones wrong behavior? The truth is, in the DEI space and the successes that Leah mentioned, because of the distortion in the numbers, we have an apparent success, is what I call it. Because we've been riding on the crest of a wave that was driven by an atrocity, murders, So much so that what we thought was happening in the United States wasn't, in fact, a world phenomenon. It wasn't just here in the United States. So the people who were in the position of power to make a decision were compelled, not because they wanted to, but because they had to, because there were world pressure, just like it was in the 1960s with the King and the Civil Rights Movement. The opportunity, I'm going to call it now, that was presented to us came from an unlikely source, the Supreme Court of the United States, with the ruling against affirmative action, specifically at the education system. But people realize that chipping away at little things make big changes over time. But it allowed us the opportunity to see who was really genuine about doing this work. Because that ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States was a get out of jail free card for those who had been performative. And I saw it in the chat, and I'm glad somebody put it up there, in their application of what we were trying to do in this DEI space. It gave them the reason to say, okay, I'm glad that's over. The lies that Leah was talking about that's being put into the data to support the reason for us no longer continuing the work that we see as absolutely essential looked like it was done. The gains haven't been made. I did some fast research last night in the top 100 of the Fortune 500 companies. An average of less than one person of color per company is what I noticed.
Right. And even with female CEOs, you have no Black female CEOs right now. And it's not just Black female CEOs, it is advances for Latinos, individuals who are Native Americans, individuals who are women. There are insignificant gains across the board, even though we have people that are touting all of these successes. And this is what's driving a lot of the lawsuits, because people are thinking we're further along than what we are.
Absolutely. One last thing. When we tell the story right, good and bad, the bad's going to be revealed, but the picture is clear. We make better decisions, more informed decisions. And is it going to hurt a little bit in the beginning? Sure. Growth is about that. If you've ever worked out, if you've ever done anything of a physical nature, you have microscopic tears in the muscles. Once those tears heal, you're stronger, you're better. These are improvement opportunities that will be invariably missed by not saying that there is a corrective action that is required and we're not attending to it. So ignoring the truth is not an option.
The other thing that I want to add about storytelling is that it is very effective when your senior leaders can tell stories. So we want them to have an opportunity to tell personal stories about experiences related to diversity. Why is this important to me as an individual? Why is this important to me as a leader? What difference does this make? Being able to help our senior leaders craft stories allows them to share the passion and allows them to actually tell the stories that have impacted them and that impacts others. So we want them to learn how to tell stories. We want them to look at the stories that make a difference so that you can multiply those stories, increase the number of positive stories that it will take to eliminate some of these years and centuries of collective harm, as Angela noted, and years of systemic racism. Let's think about and sexism and homophobia and all these other things, right? Let's make it so that our leaders can tell the story, tell why this is important, tell how this impacts everyday people. This is what we need to do when we're talking about messaging, when we're talking about the importance. If you're standing up there and you have to do a presentation for your shareholders or for your board members, you need to be able to tell the story as a leader. And this is where we as DEI leaders can provide value. Speaking of telling stories, we have to be able to properly equip our leaders for different scenarios. Now, a scenario is one way that events may unfold. And what this means is that instead of going into meetings and instead of speaking to the public and thinking, okay, this is going to all work out well, we need to be able to have preparation in place in the event that things don't work out the way that we expect them to. This is a problem for a lot of organizations because we just think, oh, yeah, whatever we do, it's going to work out in DEI. And that is not the case. In the event that you have backlash, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? A good example of this is Nike. So everyone remembers when Nike rolled out that Colin Kaepernick sneaker. And when they made the announcement that this Colin Kaepernick sneaker would be released, when they woke up in the morning, Nike executives saw sneakers being burned. They saw people cutting up Nike gear, ripping it up, burning it, throwing socks in a trash can, doing all sorts of stuff. And believe me, those executives were shaking in their boots. You can't tell me they weren't. They were afraid that everybody was going to lose their job. But you know what they did? They didn't say a word. They let the sales speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And those sneakers sold out, speaking for themselves. So, did you have something, Amber?
Yeah, I wanted to read one of the comments in the chat. Trina shared, and I apologize if I said your name wrong. Good morning. In this country, we have become good at lying about everything. As Coach Prime said this week, growing up, we used to get punished for lying. I hated it back then, but I completely understand my parents now. Telling the right story, as Leah has outlined, will save us a lot of trouble in the workplace.
Right. Right. So we want our leaders to be able to not only know the stories, but to be able to prepare for different reactions to those stories. What does that mean? It means everybody may not react well. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't tell the truth. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do what's right, even if people don't react well to it. Even if people don't respond well, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. What you have to do is engage in strategic planning. In the event that this doesn't work out the way that we thought it would, what is our response going to be? This is where we are going to say, you know what? If A doesn't work out, then we're going to do B. If C doesn't work or C happens, then we're going to do D. If E happens, then we will do F. So you want to be intentional about how you're planning for different scenarios and not just assume this is all going to go the way that I expected this to go. When Bud Light had um, that commercial, had the advertisement and preparation for LGBTQ History Month, one of the things that or LGBTQ Pride Month, one of the things that they did not prepare for was the backlash that they received. And instead of them demonstrating courage and commitment to this advertisement, you know what they did? They backtracked. Same thing with Target. So everybody says, oh, well, we don't want to be the next Bud Light or Target. But the thing that Bud Light and Target both did was they backtracked. They backtracked. And that is what made the difference in terms of them not being able to get the results that they expected. Target had positive results for its LGBTQ pride campaigns for over a decade. Think about this. And all of a sudden, this year, they decided not to have positive financial results. The reason why they didn't have it this year was because they backtracked. They said, you know what? Our staff isn't safe. So therefore, we're not going to go ahead and continue to promote this campaign the way that we normally would have. That's what happened. So we have to be very intentional. Val, I didn't hear anything about the Nivea commercial. So if someone can share information about that, that would be great. But we have to be very intentional about how we are going to prepare for different reactions to our stories, different reactions to our DEI strategy, different reactions to various scenarios that will happen in the course of our marketing and communications campaigns. One of the things that we want to do is to be proactive versus reactive. Dr. Monique said, rather than continue to be a leader for LGBTQ+, Target stepped down to becoming a follower. Look at those keywords there. Stepped down. Follower. These are the things that we don't want our organizations to be known for, right? And we want to, leadership is rewarded. And we want our organizations to be rewarded as leaders. And one of the things that we have to do is make it so that our leaders are committed to not only change, but committed to courage. Yep, Leah, that's some hard stuff. That's a hard thing to do. Yeah, it's hard, but the more people that are able to do it, the easier it becomes. The thing is, it's very, very easy right now to become followers. It's easy right now to avoid controversy. It's easy right now to become like everyone else and do what's wrong, to make it so that our diversification strategies don't work. It is easy to make it so that we falter on our bottom line because we're not being focused on the ultimate business strategy. It's easy for us to make it so that we don't tell the story right, that we pursue short-term or short-sighted tactics versus long-term strategies. But this is where we have to do better at building those allies and making it so that we live up to the ideals and the values that our organization espouses. Because right now there's a mismatch. There's a mismatch. A mismatch. It's the morning time and I haven't had any coffee yet. There's a mismatch. And what's happening is we are saying one thing and we're doing another. We're saying one thing and we're doing another. And there's like no consistency here. And this is where we have to get better, where we do as we say, and that's it. If we say we're going to be an organization that has these values, when you as a new employee come to our organization, this is what we're doing. Think about it. There's a whole bunch of folks striking right now. Why are they striking? Because you have folks that are saying one thing, they're getting paid all sorts of money, and they're not doing the right thing. Greg said, leaders should develop a strategic communication plan that includes a contingency approach for issues that may develop. not jump ship. That's right. Because a lot of folks are jumping ship. They're like, oh, you know what? I'm scared. I'm going to lose my job. No, you're going to lose your job because you jumped ship. You have to be committed to change and committed to courage. This is hard. Now, this idea of choice architecture, I like what Trina said. She said her mama used to say, tell the truth and shame the devil, okay? I'm with you, Trina.
Look, can I jump in here real quick just for a
Yeah.
couple of things you said? And I was looking at the threads and just very quickly. I want you all to also realize, as much as you might not think so, CEOs and sometimes leaders of the business industry, they're kind of bandwagon people. That's why it's easy for people I don't know who was talking about the target people stepping down and becoming a follower, because it's easier to get in line with a lot of other people than to stand by yourself and do the right thing. Leah and I were talking last night about how the pressure from other CEOs from maybe the Fortune 500 will compel a singular operating CEO to acquiesce because the target's on their back. They're easy to pick off. But I think there's a bit of reciprocity required. We are required to hold leadership accountable and also required to support leadership in their decisions as we are part of that organization, such that even if he, she, or they want to change, they'll be compelled from the groundswell to tell the truth. Because if you believe that they're the only ones who know the truth, you're deceiving yourself. You're fooling yourself. They're not the only ones. We're talking about them because they're in a leadership capacity and we have a high expectation for leadership. But when we talk about an organization being high performing and then being successful, it's not the leader only. It's the leader who sets the pace. And then it's the rest of the organization to keep it moving. So don't think because you're not in that position of quote unquote leadership that you can't make a change, you can't be a difference maker. Sometimes it does require that quote unquote little person to step up. And it does require the same amount of courage because you may be the only one initially. But I guarantee you, when you do, you'll realize that there's somebody watching you, waiting to see what it looks like for a person of integrity to step up. For a person of integrity to say, this is what it looks like to say, I'm really concerned about getting this thing right and doing the right thing. So they're out there. I just want to add that.
So I am looking up this Nivea ad. The ad is white
go ahead.
white is purity. Keep it clean, keep bright, don't let anything ruin it. Hashtag invisible. Oh goodness. Well, who came up with that ad? Okay, so
you have to remember, Leah, whitening creams is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
All over. They said the ad was planning to have a full print launch in the Middle East with a focus on Iran. The plug was pulled only 2 days after the company posted this ad on Middle East Facebook due to the severe backlash it received, primarily for its highly problematic tagline. Wow. Yeah, this is a
book in here. An interesting read for those of you who are interested to really get behind the mentality that created these actions and things like this thinking that you're saying was a book written by Isabel Wilkerson called Cast. If you get a chance, if you have some time, check out that read. It will give you a lot of background information to make you understand the world presence of this thinking and the reason why some people feel safe thinking that that's a good idea. It has a genesis.
Yeah, and Val added that the ad is from 2011. Okay, so the last point that I want to make on this slide is about this idea called choice architecture. Now, this is a technology term that basically refers to the way that we present choices being able to influence what people end up actually choosing. So choice architecture uses the tools of choice to indirectly influence the choices of others to make desired behavior changes more likely to occur. It uses a phenomenon called nudging. So this idea of choice architecture means that we're going to think through the different scenarios and kind of make it so that we have the ultimate goal that we want to accomplish, but we're nudging people towards which goal we want to accomplish, regardless if you go down the A road, if you go down the C road, if you go down the F road, whatever road you go down, you're going to arrive at the same conclusion. So what that means is that instead of us kind of leaving things to chance, we want to be more intentional and strategic about the decisions that people make regarding DEI. What we're doing is basically tightening our approach. So it's one thing to say, okay, here's our strategy. But it's another thing to say, okay, when we are working with perhaps shareholders or investors, here's the possible responses that could happen. At the end of the day, we want our investors to walk away with the idea, yes, this is a great company to invest in. So, regardless of which path you take, you will still arrive at the same decision. This is what choice architecture does. And we want to really make it so that regardless of which path someone takes to get there, because there's multiple paths, right? We can help people to arrive at that same decision. So, a better way of saying this would be, like right now, people kind of like to put us into two boxes where it's like left or right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, right? There's only male or female. There's only two boxes. In reality, there's all these different groups in between. So, what we want to be able to acknowledge is that there are a variety of different perspectives and ways of getting there, but at the end, the conclusion is still the same. Our organization is a great organization to do business with. Our organization is a great organization to invest in. Our organization is a great organization to donate to. Our organization is a great organization to educate your child, whatever it is, right? We want to be very intentional about how we design the path and the structure for us getting to that right conclusion. Next slide. Now, this Dr. Lee kind of touched on. And one of the things that happens in this space is that there are so many executives who were kind of working in silos. And I touched on it too, where I said people are afraid of being the only one to stand up and tell the truth. Instead of looking at it like, okay, I'm going to be the only one standing up and telling the truth, let's make it so that we can multiply. So if you're operating by yourself, you got a big old target on your back. And that target makes it easier for you to kind of, lose courage or lose sight of what you're actually trying to achieve. The more people, however, that you bring on board as a leader makes it more difficult for people to target you specifically. What does that mean? It means over the years, we have also pursued a similar approach. If you remember during the 1960s, when civil rights leaders as well as freedom fighters were being killed and assassinated, one of the things that we did with this DEI movement is we made it so that there are more than one leader, that there is more than one leader. There's not just one person who you can take out and all the stuff goes away. No, when we talk about gender, when we talk about religion, when we talk about race, ethnicity, when we look at veterans, when we look at disability, when you look at all these different areas, now there are lots of leaders and lots of people who specialize in different areas. It's very difficult to take everybody out. This strategy is the same type of approach that we have to use with our corporate executives, making it so that they are coalescing with other CEOs. There should be no reason why a Disney CEO should have to stand by themselves when they're trying to go up against a governor who's saying, look, I don't want you I'm going to retaliate against you for standing up against legislation that I know is going to hurt your business, that I know is going to be unfair, that I know is going to impact people negatively, right? There should have been other organizations standing up. Now, this is where I do my cheap shot. What about Florida International University, where a lot of people got DEI certificates? That's a cheap shot. I'm not going to go there, but certainly one of the things that there should have been other organizations that stood up and said, hey, this is important to us. Why didn't we have some of those when people knew that this legislation banning DEI was coming about? Why didn't more people stand up in places like Florida and Texas and other places? We have to get our leaders on board where they can say, you know what, let's work with other CEOs. And if they have problems connecting, let us DEI leaders facilitate those connections so they can share strategies. They can sit there and think about how to go about with a strategic approach so that they can lead and not follow. We want them to realize genuine change, but genuine change isn't going to come about so long as they got a big target on their backs. Let's be honest.
Yep.
Did you want to add something, Dr. Lee?
Well, so many things. I was thinking first, I was going back to what you were saying about the what was the choice strategy that you mentioned?
Choice architecture.
Choice architecture. There are a lot of ways that that's been deployed and is still being deployed. One of them, I was trying to think of the name. There was a president of CNN at the time who said, "We are not trying to tell people what to think or how to think. What we do is put in front of them all we want them to think about." It's a very similar tactic. Noam Chomsky said a lot of the times it's called priming, is that what we will do is give you all the information we need you to think about such that when you come to a conclusion you think is yours when it's already been decided through something called informed consent. This is why you can't be asleep at the wheel and you have to pay very close attention to the language that is used in our communications and what we sign and co-sign to. I'm going to take that and transfer it, move it to where we talk about preparing the boards and investors, because the leaders that we're talking about do have people who they report to. The advantage that we could possibly have in that is by informing them of the language that they need to know, of the tactics that needs to be considered, and the necessity of having an inclusive mindset. We do that by giving them the language to articulate the value proposition of DEI. Because there are many people who think they know what we do and understand fully how it is to be done and don't have the first clue. A lot of the times, even the leaders who we expecting these great things from don't have the language, because there is a selfish motive that's driving the people who are the direct reports to the direct reports, whose vested interest is in deceiving and keeping that leader in the dark. So we have to inform the people who the leaders report to. And what can come from that is an accountability component. The plausible deniability of, if I just had known better, I would have done better, but I just didn't know. And people who work with me in our facilitation will hear me say, I am the consummate optimist. I believe that people in a position of leadership are trying to do good things. Unfortunately, they have bad information, less information, and then there's always the peer pressure that comes with not having enough support and good information to stand alone sometimes. If you, I'm not a very biblical guy, but I do read the Bible, and I do believe that there is some good there. But if you think about the most significant, I'm going to say, accomplishment of Moses was when he parted the Red Sea, right? And sometimes what was mentioned there was you just have to stand still. You don't run, you don't back down, you don't have to change, just stand still. I see that's what happened with the pizza analogy. That person pointed out a problem and then watched what happened with the Nike, with the shoes. He watched what happened. Because when you put something out there that's good and support it with some facts, with some strength, with some conviction, there are people listening, and there are people who want to get it right and are trying to get it right. They just need to know that it's okay. That's where we come in. We're preparing the people with the information that they need, ensuring that the investors and the board have the information to make right decisions, and then holding every person accountable.
Right. It's difficult, and leaders are human,
Yes.
but we want them to have that imagination. We want them to inspire people with the vision. We want them to become great. We want them to uh, get that tag again as being the most trusted people, right? We want to inspire the greatness that lies in all of our executives. And we also live up to the dreams that we have been working on for all of these years. It's not time for us to say, hey, our work is done. It's not time for us to say, oh, you know what? We're going to quit. It's time for us to reimagine where we are going. And when I say reimagine, I'm not saying that we're changing the name DEI to something else. I'm not saying that we allow other people to define how DEI should be applied and utilized. What I'm saying is, let's reimagine a future where everyone can be included and where there is fairness and where we have better business results. Let's reimagine how to make our workplaces more accessible. Let's reimagine how to ensure that there is fair pay. Let's reimagine how we get how we create an environment that's harassment free or free from bullying. This idea of doing this work is not work that we can do alone. And this is why we need our CEOs to work together with other CEOs. We need them to get the board and investors on board. We need them to appeal to suppliers and partners. We need them to make sure that senior executives aren't giving interviews on the side and saying, I knew this wouldn't work. We want to make sure that we're not just calling out, but we're calling in. We want to make sure that we are using the call out feature to call in, right? That we're bringing people in and not just saying, hey, we're going to call you out and leave you out to dry, but we're going to make it so that we bring you in to be successful, to be more successful. This is this is where we have value, and this is where we create more value. Dr. Lee?
I scrolled through some of the chats and I forgot the name. Someone mentioned about the systemic barriers or systemic practices. The reason that makes this work so hard is we have to realize we're talking about centuries of systemic practices and policies that have become so prevalent, so pervasive, that they've been normalized to invisibility. So when we think a person is acting on their own, a group is acting, on their own, so to speak. Remember, this is normal in the minds of people who have been allowed to walk about this world, doing whatever they want, to whatever degree, unencumbered by any laws or anybody else's perspective. And that's something we have to take into consideration when we approach people. That is why the criticality of information is so necessary, to present such a compelling perspective that the person who has been operating almost unconsciously, not realizing the privilege that they walk with. And all of us have different privileges, but we're talking about the privilege that Robert Livingston mentioned, institutional privilege, whereby just by how you look, you get opportunities other people are not entitled to. That you can make them aware that they can use that very same privilege to make the change necessary to make fairness happen for everybody, where every person is allowed to benefit. We looked at this thing, an item 3, we're talking about engaging suppliers and partners. What we're talking about was what M. Scott Peck referred to as significant breakthroughs requiring significant break widths. Consideration of perspectives that haven't been a part of their awareness, because it is good for them. And because they haven't been availed of this information because of, I'm going to call it cronyism. We show them how that through logic, through reasonableness, that this is good for business and good for you. And ultimately, again, you have a business that is sustainable. You have a business that is respectful of diversity, which is valuing people in the process of satisfying the bottom line. There is no sacrifice of any aspect of what makes business sustainable and successful.
Right.
Janine?
And
One more thing, drumline. Drumline comes to mind. One line, one beat. It's so important to understand that support is necessary. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dan.
Janine shared, yes, this is not just behavior change, but deep personality change, the hardest thing to change. Trina shared, people must understand it is a system attack, not an attack on an individual.
right.
Yep.
And I love that, where we have to be able to, what I will call, correct the narrative that's out there. Because the narrative is that we are attacking people. We're not attacking people. We are attacking the system, right? When we're talking about ableism, we're not attacking someone who is able. We are attacking the system that empowers ableism, right? We want to make it so that people who are able, that they're able to live as healthy as possible for as long as possible. But for those who are not, who have different disabilities and who have different abilities, we want them to make it so that they can also experience accessibility, right? We wanted to make it so that they don't have to experience discrimination. We wanted to make it so that we are including neurodiversity and all sorts of different other areas in our conversation, and not just making it so that we're glossing over it so that we can easily talk about the subjects that are more divisive. Angela Hammond said this is cognitive dissonance.
Oh, yes.
And it's one of those things that makes it very difficult when we have leaders who are engaging in cognitive dissonance in the same way that everyone else is. We have watched fake news and misinformation evolve into a full-time operation in conspiracy thinking and belief and all sorts of other things. And certainly we have to pull those reins back in. Get people to tell the truth. Get people to get more folks on board and say, hey, let's do things better. Let's do things the right way, regardless of the cost today, because if we kick the can down the road, it's going to cost more to deal with in the future. Look at what's happening at Northwestern, where they said, look, we have we have bullying, and we have all this harassment and hazing going on in the football team, the volleyball team, the baseball team. Not only do they have current students that are jumping ship, but they have former students who are bringing lawsuits, former staff that are bringing lawsuits, current staff that are bringing lawsuits, lawsuits everywhere. This is going to cost them a lot of money. And at the end of the day, the cost to deal with it in the beginning would have been much cheaper than the cost to deal with it now. So when we're looking at kicking the can down the road, what's the benefit of paying a higher cost later in comparison to nipping the stuff in the bud and dealing with it effectively now? Next slide. So
I want to just go back to a comment just very quickly. I won't take long at all. I don't know who put that up there about the cognitive dissonance, but that's real, because a lot of times that's what we're dealing with. And the way that process works is the person who's going through that. You could equate it to an organization, but they're receiving two bits of conflicting truths. And their brain is trying to reconcile, what exactly should I follow and what exactly should I do? This is why it is imperative for us to, as much as we can, to reach as far as we can with correct, substantiated information that allows for more effective and correct decisions. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's not new. Reagan did it back in the 80s by making a statement on a national platform that if you are not of a protected group, you are the victim of reverse discrimination. It begins and then it grows because it's not challenged. We have to come with information that is current, that can be supported, and that is echoed continuously, such that more people can hear information, such that as they're reconciling all this created, what they call, alternative facts, they can see a better decision to make and make better informed choices. That's
right.
all.
And I agree with that, Dr. Lee. We have to keep repeating it. So there's an old mantra in marketing, in communications, where the first time that you say something, people may not hear you. The second time you say it, they may not hear you. The third time you may say it, they may not hear you. You have to repeat the message 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times before folks start to get it. DEI benefits everyone. We're going to be committed to doing business better. If we have stuff that's broken, we're going to fix it. We have the courage to change. We want to lead and not follow. These are the things that we need our CEOs, our leaders, to keep saying, not just to say once, but to keep saying it. We are an organization that stands for these values, and we're going to live them out no matter what the cost is. And being able to look at the costs as being cheaper to deal with now than dealing with it later after we kick the can down the road and it balloons into an avalanche. Like Dr. Monique said, the avalanche effect.
Yep.
It's going to cost more. In the business cases, let's be honest and deal with it now while it's a snowflake so that it doesn't become an avalanche. Okay, so we want to thank you all for staying with us this whole presentation. If you can share in the chat what the most interesting feature was, what you're going to do differently. We just want to thank you all for just joining us this morning. and thinking about how to ensure that your senior leaders are able to have a different message, that we're not buying into, we're calling people to the carpet when they say woke, when we're asking what does woke mean? What does it mean when you say that we are doing that, we're anti this group, or that we're doing reverse discrimination? And being able to ask the right questions. We want people to communicate better, and ultimately to make it so that we can move this needle forward.